Welcome to the Health on Track podcast. Let's talk well-being.
Welcome to the Health on Track podcast, offering you a shot of wellness. I'm your host, Hayley Clements, and I proudly oversee member engagement and PR at GIG Golf. Today, we're diving deep into the realms of self-care and communication, two incredibly vital yet often underestimated aspects of well-being. Joining me is an expert in this subject matter, Hazel Kurian. Hazel serves as an Associate Director of Clinical Operations and Diversity at ICAS MENA. Her passion for fostering well-being in the workplace and driving positive transformation is truly inspiring, and we are very grateful to have you here with us today. Thank you for your time, energy, and for your presence.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Diving deep into self-care. Before we delve into the heart of our discussion, could you shed some light on what ICAS MENA does as a company?
Absolutely. We are an employee assistance provider and program, and essentially the idea behind an EAP is taking care of employees, and a happier, healthy workforce is a more productive workforce. So we really get behind the idea of well-being with employees in the workspace and in their communities at large.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, this is sure to be an interesting conversation. So let's talk about self-care. I feel like it's a term that gets completely misconstrued so much. So self-care, some people think it's about indulging in a spa day or some beauty treatments or eating a box of chocolates or donuts, or even going to the gym is some people's self-care. But I really feel there's more to it. So could you just guide us through what is self-care and how can it be authentic to a person?
Absolutely. And I think it can be all those things. It can be the chocolates and the gym. And just like you said, it's that and more. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people underestimate what self-care is, that they think if they just do a simple little checklist, then that's all they need. But it is about going deeper. And self-care, the way I like to think about it is, are you being an active participant in your life? Are you making conscientious, authentic decisions that will, benefit yourself as an individual, your family, your relationships, who you are at work? And yeah, that's kind of my takeaway in terms of what self-care can be.
Yeah. I think you're so right. We listen, and I think from COVID, what happened is people kind of looked at, okay, how do I look after myself now, especially being isolated? But then, I struggled with it as well. So I write out my routine, my daily routine. I should be doing this. I should meditate for 10 minutes. I should move for 5, because that's what everyone says I should be doing. So how can you make it individual, and kind of how do you know as a person what type of self-care you need?
That's a really nice question. I think the reality is also just because of the pandemic, it put a hyper focus on the importance of well-being, not just, again, in communities, but also in workspaces. So for you to identify which self-care technique might work for you, you need to take a little bit of a step back. And this is a term that has many different colors and flavors in the world. It's called the self-care checklist. It's called the micro-wheel of life, the micro-wheel of well-being. And it's essentially identifying a few core areas that make up who you are and the things that are important to you. I always start with the foundation, which is emotional self-care or emotional well-being. If you get all of your ducks in line in this particular aspect, everything else can feel much more easy to manage and handle. So your emotional self-care is, what is your self-talk like? Do you need to see a therapist? Do you, need to spend time outside of work and outside of home and almost have this third space that is truly personal for you? Yeah, it's things like financial well-being, it's physical well-being, it's social well-being, it is psychological well-being. How am I challenging myself cognitively? It's things like career well-being. What do I need to do to feel, and thrived with life? And what I generally suggest to people, if you're not sure where to start, or if you're not sure whether the things you're putting in place right now are really working, is Number one, it's consistency. So to consistently try this, easier said than done, but you don't have to overdo it. You don't necessarily have to check in every day because that can be exhausting. But once a week, maybe towards the end of the week, perhaps just before your week starts, you take a look at that wheel, right? And you identify again, for example, under physical, maybe a project for someone is, okay, I want to ensure that my health is on track and and I want to make sure that I take my vitamins. So what is it that I need to do to make that happen? What small steps do I need to do to ensure that that's being put in place? And you literally, I always am a firm believer in putting pen to paper, even more so. I mean, I know we have so many apps out there, but essentially going through regularly, what is it that you need to do and which dimensions perhaps are you neglecting or neglected in the last week? Was it that you spent a lot of time focusing on your relationships, which is a great thing, but what you've noticed also is that you didn't get to those tasks around your financial well-being. You missed that deadline for taxes or whatever the case is. You've been avoiding having that conversation about budgeting with your partner. And again, it can almost recalibrate. It gives you the opportunity to identify, okay, this is no longer working for me. And then really to also ask yourself, what am I doing that potentially needs to continue, and what am I doing that needs to perhaps change, that's no longer serving me? And do I need some support and third-party help? Maybe it's chatting to a friend, maybe it's a professional, and that's where you can start off as a guide.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Again, the wheel of life and kind of segmenting it all. I think the thing that I love this subject. It's very close to my heart. It's something that I have worked on for quite some years now. I went through quite a journey with this space, and I know how long a journey is. It's not quick. It is something that you can implement quick steps. I'm not saying you can do small changes, and over time it will get better. But it does take a long time to kind of change the way, if you've been programmed for so long to do certain things, it's going to take a while to unprogram that and do it another certain way. So my question to you is, being obviously a self-care wellness expert, how can someone who's sat there thinking, how do I do this? So they've taken your tips and they said, right, look at the wheel of life, segment it. That in itself can become stressful. I have personally looked at it before and said, oh, this is so much. Like, then what do I do? And then what? And then what? And then how do I get there? What would be your tips for someone starting to look at this journey?
To not panic. All right, because I think that's where we gravitate towards when we're feeling overwhelmed. And the reality is that a big part of self-care is a ripple effect. It's going to impact when you start really putting those things into place, there are going to be changes. And sometimes for things to get better, things have to kind of feel messy to begin with. And it's okay to feel and sit in that mess. And I think we're so also programmed to make things perfect, absolutely, snap. And that's, again, that doesn't do anybody any justice. We're not doing ourselves any favors by saying, within 6 months, I'm going to be financially independent, if that's a goal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might take longer, like you've said. And to go back to the basics as well, and to not panic. Yeah, and when you see yourself panicking, when you feel yourself feeling as though you're unraveling, that it's feeling overwhelming, again, that's a big part of the self-care, putting things into practice to say, okay, let me take a bit of a step back. Let me take a bit of a break. What is it that I need to do to ensure that overwhelm is not going to get the better of me and undo the really good stuff that I've, progressed in?
It's interesting what you said there. I really felt like you were going to say, check in with yourself and see how you feel. And that is something I used to hear all the time. I would go to a sound healing class or a yoga studio, or I did go and see a therapist for a long time. And she would always say, and how does that make you feel? I don't know how that makes me feel. I'm not sure, because I've never been in touch with my body. Even now I struggle when someone says to me, oh, how does that make you feel? I'm like, well, this can tell me how I feel, but everything else can't. Then your brain is obviously the I'm sure you have lots of stats on this, the brain will overtake everything because it tries to keep you safe. So how can someone who's looking at trying to develop a self-care practice, kind of implement more well-being in their life, how can they check in with themselves and see how that feels for them?
Well, maybe to also just put the disclaimer in there that as a psychologist, I definitely have used that term. And how does that make you feel? I think that we're all guilty of that as a profession.
So frustrating.
But it can be useful, right? And when you talk about checking in with your body, our body is our friend, right? And it's receiving impulses all the time and stimuli all the time. We just need to start tuning in a little bit better. And it's a little bit like if you've ever been to a country that has had, you know, a tsunami in its history or a tornado. If you go to that country, you will notice that they have signage everywhere. There will be spots that, you know, people can run to for, you know, safety. And it's a little bit like that. Your body is your first warning sign, yeah? So it's about, again, tuning in to what is it? You know, what does sweaty palms mean to you? When do you get those sweaty palms? When your heart is fluttering. And again, hearts can flutter for different, you know, many different reasons. It can give you a lot of information about how you feel around somebody else. Is your system calming down around someone else, but you've never realized that because you haven't taken notice? Is being around another person, again, jump-starting a reaction that might be very telling for you? You won't know unless you ask those questions. So again, I go back to basics. Keep a log. If you're really invested in wanting to try and do this, try keep a thought log and a body log to say, okay, the last time I felt anxious, these are the things that were happening. And usually then over time, what's going to happen is that when you start to feel that heart palpitation and those palms getting sweaty, again, those are just a few examples, you can already start saying, okay, you know what, I'm going into something that's maybe going to make me feel a bit anxious. And then what you do is you jumpstart what you have pre-identified to manage that anxiety or that fear or that anger, you know, or the emotional dysregulation that we all, you know, experience. Yeah. So your body is your friend, your body and your body signs are, your early warning signs.
Perfect, thank you. And in regards to your body being the first warning sign, physical, is that a warning sign? So if someone was to get headaches regularly, is that something to then check in about for self-care reasons as well?
Absolutely. And for different kinds of reasons. It could be a medical issue. It could be an organic issue. It could be, you know, is it something that you're eating? Are you spending too much time in front of the screen without blue light glasses? You know, that kind of thing. Is it something that is more psychosomatic? So it's something that's stemming from a very real psychological or emotional space. So I always say, again, when that's there and it's starting and it's nagging a little bit, because again, we're great at ignoring the signs as well. And yeah, when you're seeing that coming back, it's something worthwhile investigating. But I also know that, again, because I'm a human being myself, I am also very guilty of procrastinating going to the doctor, for example, or having that conversation about, okay, you know what, I always feel like this at this time of the day. What is that about? I'm struggling with my sleep, but I know I need to maybe invest in some melatonin, but that means I have to go back and get another vitamin, you know. Clearly vitamins are a theme here. And yeah, it's scary, but that in itself is a lot of information that you can work with. What is that procrastination about? Yeah. Again, it's not about a quick fix. It's about just asking yourself some questions and maybe some uncomfortable questions. And it's okay and to be prepared for some uncomfortable truths. Yeah.
No, I think it's definitely what you're saying is completely resonating with me, and I hope it's resonating with all the listeners. But I think we get so caught up in our life and the day-to-day, and then people become depressed or they have anxiety or they develop a mental health issue. And I don't want to say all the time, and I'm not a professional speaking, but I do feel like if we allowed ourselves more time to sit there and understand why, it can help, but we get so worked up. And I've put my hand up. I've done this before.
All
And I'm so grateful that you, as an expert, are saying you've done it as well, because what I felt when I was going through my challenge was that I was the only one. And I loved being in Wellbeing, and actually part of my job was Wellbeing, and I was going through something on a personal level, and I was too ashamed to then go, actually, I need help, because then I'm not a professional, because I don't know what I'm talking about. How can I say something to someone else and actually not practice it myself? So I advocate anyone who has found their routine. And I think that's another crucial point, is finding yours and not looking at Instagram.
And not comparing.
And comparing yourself, that person's on the beach meditating. That person has their routine. Oh, they have their coffee on the balcony reading their book every morning. Why am I not able to manage to do that? And that was my problem, was having a list too long of what I wanted to achieve in the morning and never being able to do it. So it was a part of punishing myself. I realised it was a way to punish myself that I couldn't get all those done, so then I was a failure. So
Absolutely. And I think that in itself, it's that self-awareness. If you want to really jumpstart a self-care routine that sticks, part of it, the basis of it, is ensuring that the foundation is around self-awareness. So asking yourself that question, or those questions, and sitting with the truth and the reality, and saying at some point, I imagine it was a case of, it's okay, I got this. I don't need to compare. My list doesn't have to be 1 million pages long. I don't need to be a victim of analysis paralysis, right?
yeah, for sure. I can always do better, however. And I'm sure this conversation is going to lead me to going, hey, I need to look at this will.
Good. It makes
What was
me...
Hazel saying? I'll be Googling it. What is the relationship between communication and self-care?
Well, communication can come in different forms, right? So it's how you are communicating with yourself. So what is your own speak and self-speak? Communication is such an important tool in self-care. It can either work for you or against you. It can either help or hinder. And it really is, it boils down to how you are communicating. Not so much the what you're communicating, it's the how. So again, I mean, if we have to go down to the basics, it's, again, understanding what is it that I want to communicate. A big part, when we talk about communication around self-care, it's very often around boundaries and setting boundaries for yourself and with others. And that's always an interesting topic. It's very anxiety-provoking for a lot of people because, again, boundary setting, while healthy for the individual, can feel very uncomfortable at the same time for them and the people around them that they're trying to set boundaries with. And when I talk about this, it's not just in, again, family spaces or communities or relationships, it's at work. People really struggle to say no, for example. People pleasing in different aspects can really impact how a person experiences their own journey around well-being. And so, again, it would be about asking yourself, okay, let's start focusing on how I communicate what I need. And communication can be direct. It can be a conversation where I'm talking to you in person. It can be written. It can be over email, over text. Communication and setting boundaries can also be about what's not said. I can, give a message quite clearly by my actions then as well. If I want to spend less time around a toxic person, for example, I don't always need to have the conversation with them directly. Okay, and again, it happens where the scenario might be in a place of work or with a family member that we can't actually avoid. What we can choose to promise ourselves is that we're going to try as best as possible to spend less time with them. Yeah, so you don't have to, again, make it as direct as that, but it can be much more subtle.
That's really interesting. So kind of almost put yourself in a bubble and
be selective about what you want to communicate and with whom, and who do you want again in your self-care bubble, if you want to call it like that. Yeah.
So if you were to need to communicate with someone about boundaries, how can we do that in let's say, a positive way, or how does that look?
I think the first thing to understand is that it is hard. Boundary setting is going to be challenging at first, especially if you're a person who hasn't been great at setting those boundaries, right? You mentioned before, sometimes we're so programmed to respond or to think in a particular way that then to all of a sudden change, even if it's something that's going to benefit us and our relationships with others, there are going to be people who are not happy with it. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's going to feel awkward. It can feel disingenuous, maybe even. Yeah, and even the people who love us, who care about us, who want the best for us overall, they're all of a sudden going to no longer have the same access to you that they've been used to, and that can be jarring to them. Yeah. So ways to communicate that need for boundary setting, for example, would be about starting small, right? First, ask yourself, what boundary am I wanting to set and why? And then it's about identifying a select few. It could be someone who you genuinely trust and who you know absolutely cares about you, right? And you can then try and use them to say, okay, listen, I'm going to start setting boundaries in this way, and I want you to almost be an accountability buddy around this. And so it's getting people to be more aware. It can often, give you the opportunity to chat about this and unpack it. Sometimes, again, we get so lost in our own thinking and our own hearts and our own stories. We sometimes do need an external voice to be like, you're actually doing a great job. Well done. Or, what did you say? What language did you use? What tone was that?
It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So that can also be something that helps. And then, other than starting small, it's about identifying what really, again, feels authentic. I always also say it is about safety first. Not all of us have the luxury of being in environments, whether it's at work or whether it's in our communities or our families, to set down boundaries that might negatively impact and actually have a very real safety impact, okay? So sometimes I say to people, what are the next best things to do? I say that, for example, and I'm giving worst case scenarios here. A young person, who maybe doesn't agree with the career path that their parents want them to go on. They might want to have a different life, yeah? But if they're living in the same home and their parents are funding them, that might not be the best time to talk about those boundaries in that way just yet, right? In another extreme, abusive relationships, yeah? If boundary setting there literally means that you could be endangered, then it's about, okay, what else can I do until I'm in a safe environment that I can then focus on this, yeah? So I do also say safety first. That is an aspect that we often don't talk about because we want things to be light and fluffy, but these are very real things. And again, in the beginning, it's not going to be comfortable, but in the long term, it can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I love what you say. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of people go on a self-care journey. Some people start to see it as selfish. I know when a couple of my friends did, they become a recluse. They cut themselves off because they were just doing their internal work. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. So if you were best buds with someone and you were going out all the time and you were there constantly, whenever they called, you would be there. When you take a step back and you start maybe focusing on yourself, you start to put that boundary. Some people don't get it. So and then you feel lonely because now...
And misunderstood.
You're misunderstood, you're alone, you're different. Maybe it's a you problem, maybe... no one else needs this, so why should I need this? What do you say to the people that are out there thinking, I'm alone because I'm looking after myself?
I think, again, sometimes it's about identifying what is causing them to feel lonely. Is it that the people in their lives are not on board? And if that is the case, why? Sometimes it is about how are you communicating it. I can totally understand if, one of my best friends all of a sudden just goes absolutely quiet, doesn't speak, isn't messaging
Phones
me
off.
kind of thing. Yeah, phones are off, exactly. I'm going to worry about them. So sometimes it's part of that. And then there's a difference, I think, sometimes between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is something that you're choosing. Sometimes we all need that time alone in our cocoon where we can heal, where we can focus on ourselves. Again, it's not always easy because not everyone is in the same boat. It's, I think, much more difficult for a parent, for example, to get that space. But it is about, again, getting creative and finding these little bubbles. Yeah. And it is about then identifying the people in your life that you think you could reach out to. If you feel that you truly are alone and you don't want to talk to someone about it, what is that about? How much of it is because of you taking on the burden of not being burdensome, if that makes sense? I don't want to be a burden on my best friend. I don't want to tell them about how I'm struggling with my finances, my relationship, my body image, whatever the case is. And I don't want to be judged, or I know that they're going through so much by themselves. I don't want to add to that. We see that all the time. I don't want to put that my partner is already so stressed at work. I don't want to have to talk about how I'm stressed in, these ways. And so is that something that then needs to be challenged? Are our partners or our loved ones really thinking that? Yeah. Are our managers really thinking that? Are our colleagues really thinking that when we feel embarrassed to say, guys, I need to take a beat. Yeah, I need to take a step back, or I really need some help here, or I need to reevaluate my whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So also part of that is then identifying, okay, if maybe I feel I really am alone in my social or private life, where does a potential third-party professional come in? Where their job, I'm talking, for example, with a financial consultant or a psychologist, maybe these are the people who don't have any bias around what's happening in your life. They're really there to give you a space, either to educate or to, again, allow you some sound, like a sounding board, yeah? And you're not in a vacuum. Yeah.
Just a vent.
Absolutely.
The mind's
Everybody
crazy,
needs
right?
a good vent. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It goes a bit wild, especially, and I think I was having this conversation with a friend just the other day, and your mind tends to elaborate the story that it's been given. So you have the fact of what it is, and then actually your mind creates it into something else that it wants it to be. So actually just saying the facts then ends up not actually, if it's in your own head, it's going to go round and round. If you're saying it out loud, you have to say just the facts. Yeah. And then someone else puts it in perspective and says, okay, what's happening here and how's that making you feel? Yeah. And I don't sit there and ask myself how I feel. But if you said to me, if we were sat down having a conversation, you said, how does that make you feel, Hayley? I would then sit there and think, how does that make me feel? Yeah. So I think it's allowing ourselves the time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And allowing yourself the time at some point to also get comfortable asking yourself, how am I feeling? A little bit of a check-in, yeah? But a lot of us feel that it's indulgent to self-care. Use the term selfish. This is such a age-old, tired, way of thinking about self-care, and it's not selfish at all. And I am tired of this particular analogy about the oxygen mask from in a plane. When something happens, like cabin pressure changes, the masks are going to come down, and you're told to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then help others. Which again, absolutely, that's a nice, easy way of looking at it. But it's if we think about it and take a step back, very symbolically, it's an emergency situation. That plane is about to crash or there's turbulence, right? Is there maybe a better analogy? And I really enjoy thinking about self-care as tending a garden, right? Choosing where you want to plant whatever it is that you want to plant. Choosing which flowers or which plants bring you the most joy. What needs more sunshine? What needs a little bit of extra care? What needs to be quietened down, during the winter months or the summer months, for example, for us here. And that is something, again, that is a little bit more gentle, but it's all about consistency. Yeah. So I hope that
No, I'm just thinking
helps.
about my garden now. Like, just think about where do I need the shade and
What weeds are there and
another-
why, and what do we
yeah.
need to do? Yeah.
No, it's a great, great analogy. So everyone think about your gardens. Last question for you. It's kind of two in one, so I'm kind of cheating here. So, the word boundaries, should that word ever be used when you're trying to create a boundary with someone? And part two of that is, what are the mistakes that people make? So I feel like they might combine into one here.
Okay. You're going to have to keep me honest and reroute me if I go on a tangent. But I think sometimes, again, when you use the term boundary in a conversation, especially with someone that you're trying to set a boundary with, it might be something that is almost a trigger to say, oh, but now why do you want to keep this boundary with me? What is it that I've done? And again, I think we've almost demonized that term a little bit to say, oh, no, boundary means something is wrong. And we automatically, assume it's us. If someone is trying to set a boundary with us, we assume I'm to blame here, or there's something I'm doing wrong. And really what we should be focusing on is, again, the self-care of that individual, or our own self-care if it's us trying to set that boundary. We're comfortable, it's absolutely fine to not use the term. At the end of the day, what is the intention? It's not to set a boundary, it's to spend less time going out because I want to spend more time working or studying for that course that's going to help me in the long term, as opposed to having
saying
coffee.
yes to everything.
Saying yes to everything, saying yes to every
Fear
family,
of missing out.
absolutely. FOMO is a real thing, right? It's
Yeah.
FOMO, or it's the sense of obligation that I have to say yes, yeah? Or it's a people pleasing. If I say no, they're not going to like me, or I'm going to be less inclined to get a job offer, or whatever the case is. Again, different people will have different stories and narratives. So again, it also boils down to context. And I will say this, and this is something I feel quite strongly about in terms of self-care, because self-care is something that is spoken about. We now talk about it quite openly, some, to degrees of success and others not. Self-care can be very much an individual choice, and ideally this is also where we empower ourselves to focus and be those active participants in our lives, as I mentioned. But sometimes we talk about self-care within families, within organizations. There's this big push to, self-care. And then what happens, I've noticed, is that the onus of self-care falls only on the shoulders of that individual or the employee or, the children, or the parent. Mm-hmm. And it should be, again, what is the system? If you are telling your employees, I'm going to use that as the best example. If you're telling your employees, yeah, you know what, you need to set your own pace, you need to self-care, don't run yourself into the ground, but then you're also the organization that expects people to respond to every single email at any given time, and, often sets incredibly unrealistic deadlines all the time. Are you really being fair? Are you creating an environment where that self-care is possible for an individual? You can have as many therapy sessions, as many spa treatments, as many vitamins as you want, whatever chocolates, cupcakes. But at the end of the day, it's also, again, it's not just about you. It's also about looking at what is happening in the macrocosm, right? What is happening around me? Absolutely. What's happening around me? What is the system there? And how much of that system attributes and helps me with that goal. Yeah. So I guess the second part of the question, and you're going to have to remind me what that was, about the...
Should you use boundaries in the conversation?
So that was, so again, that's really up to you and up to the person at will. And so maybe common mistakes that people make when trying to set these boundaries, again, it goes hand in hand with communication, is number one, getting at your basics. What is your tone? And what is your timing? The number of times when I was still a practicing psychologist in South Africa, I would have this with couples that I was seeing, where they would always, almost every other couple that I would work with, would always have a blistering fight but on the way to a wedding or on the way to, a family event. So for whatever reason, why are you having this very charged conversation / fight, really, when you're in a car on a way, on your way to something where you're going to have to now interact with and entertain and put your best face forward, right? So it's about timing. It's about being conscious about your tone. It's about, again, I go back to that principle of safety first. Are you safe to have this conversation with someone? Yeah. And again, are you going to be direct in your communication, or do you think you want to try something indirect? Yeah. First, absolutely. Yeah. So those would be my rookie mistakes of communication then as well. Not knowing and not being prepared for the conversation. Have an idea of what you want to convey, and if you need to, again, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with a manager or a colleague, write it down so you can keep track. Again, not to necessarily go in saying, you're in trouble, I've got my list here, but rather to say, look, this is something that's hard for me. I want to make sure that I'm covering everything because it is important to me. So please let me have my notes, but this is what I want to cover with you. And give people a bit of prep time. If you're asking for a meeting with a manager because you're, desperately unhappy with your workload, maybe try to give them a little bit of a heads up to say, hi, I'd like to, set up a meeting just with regards to my roles recently, yeah? Or with a partner, don't keep them waiting for a whole week or until the weekend to say, I have to talk, we need to talk, yeah?
Don't worry, we'll do it at the weekend, not now.
Yeah, exactly. So something like that can also help, but I can go on and on about that, but those would be my stuff.
All day about this, but I think we're sadly out of time. But thank you so much for sharing your tips, tricks. And I think everyone, there was so much in that. I think with the wheel, with some of the tips to take to the kind of the conversation when you're setting a boundary, how to do that with, I personally have actually gone into a conversation with a partner with a notebook. Yeah. And because I knew there was so much bothering me and I actually wanted to just get everything and make sure I did it in the correct way as well, and not go off on a tangent about certain points, then you end up in a fight. So thank you for all your tips. I hope everyone found that very valuable. We're understanding the meaning and importance of self-care. I extend and encourage all of you listening to take a moment to embark on the journey and introspect, discovering the unique brand of self-care that resonates to you. As I said, there was a lot of tips in there. So play back, listen back to that, because there was some hugely inspiring things that even I am going to listen and make notes of those when I go back.
Get that will done.
Yeah, I will be. So once again, a huge thank you to you for joining us today. Be sure to join our next episode as we explore emotional eating, unravel the secrets of embracing emotions rather than turning to food for comfort. Join us on your preferred streaming platform for your shot of wellness. Until next time, Hazel, a huge thank you once again. Stay well and keep thriving.
Thank you very much.